Today is the day. Get your fabric scraps out because I know you probably have a box, maybe 2, maybe 3 stashed away, or maybe just like me, you're simply drowning in them. And as you know, I love creating with fabric scraps. I'm on a mission to turn them into something beautiful and hopefully give you some inspiration and give you some ideas. And that's exactly what we're doing today. So get those fabric scraps out and let's get started. I did start by pre-sorting the fabric a little bit behind the scenes because as you know, I do have a lot of fabric scraps. So to make our life a little bit easier and this video a little bit more efficient, I've sorted them out in this kind of color scheme of earthy tones. We have some nice green and beige and brown, a couple of prints in the same color palette as well. So I think this is going to be quite interesting, not only combining solids and prints, but also combining knits and wovens. As you can see, some fabric scraps are quite small, some are a little bit bigger and therefore easier to work with, but that's the deal when you are creating with fabric scraps. You don't necessarily pick and choose, you just have what you have, and there's certain beauty in that as well because it forces you to step outside of the box and really get creative. And when it comes to today's project, I'm really gravitating to combining these two fabrics together, and I'm thinking that I'm going to make a really fun and interesting top. Now I haven't decided just yet if I'm going to use the rest of the fabric scraps, so I'm going to put them over here, but the next step is to decide what kind of base I'm going to be using for this garment. In this particular case, not only I have to keep in mind how much fabric do I have and if the pattern that I choose is suitable for that, or maybe I can work around it a little bit, but I also have to remember that I'm working with 2 different types of fabrics, one that stretches and one that doesn't, and the pattern needs to accommodate both of them. The printed fabric is viscose and it has no stretch to it whatsoever. And then Hockey Green is French Terry. That's on the lighter side, so I think combining these 2 is going to work out. Now, when it comes to the pattern, I decided to go for a raglan shirt pattern that we have drafted on the channel quite a few years back. There is a full step-by-step tutorial on how to measure, how to draft, and how to sew, and it's one of my favorites. And because originally I did draft it for a woven fabric, that tells me that it can accommodate both fabrics within the same garment, which is exactly what I'm looking for. One of the very first steps for me in projects like these is to estimate how much fabric do I have and if I can cut any full pattern pieces out of it. And if the answer is none, then of course I have to figure out what adjustments I will need to make. As it often happens when I work with fabric scraps, of course, as of right now, I don't have enough fabric to cut full front or full back pattern piece, but I do have like bits and pieces of fabric from other fabric scraps, and I'm thinking that perhaps I could get around it by inserting a really interesting side seam panel. With that, I'm going to jump right in and start cutting the partial front pattern piece and back pattern piece, adding hem allowances and seam allowances as I cut my fabric. So here's my partial front and my partial back pattern piece, and what I'm missing is a side panel right here in the middle. So let's get that done. And the first thing is that I need to outline where did I fold in my pattern pieces in order to be able to cut them. And I'm going to do that on both the front and the back because then I'm going to combine them. I'm going to mark which one is which, back and front, so that way I don't forget, and then cut them off. Now I need to make these 2 into one pattern piece, and my key point here is lining up the underarm area because that will make sure that I don't need to alter or adjust the sleeve. Now the new panel here is quite straight, so I did get rid of the side seam curve, but since this particular pattern has a good bit of ease, it will be alright. Actually, because of this particular side panel, the assembly sequence is going to be quite backwards for this top, and I'm going to start by pressing and completing all of the hems. I do, however, want to take the advantage of the side panel and incorporate little slits. And for that, I'm going to fold hems right sides facing, stitch, then fold them back, and then cover stitch. Once all hems are done, I can start working on the side panel, and as you can see, I have made a ton of little notches. All of them are about 1/2 inch apart. Next, I made this tiniest little tie from this viscose, and now I'm going to loop it just like this, creating little loops on each side for sort of like a corset side look. To secure these loops in place, my very first instinct was to baste it all together, but then I realized it could be a little bit easier if I apply a narrow strip of interfacing to hold everything together. Now I know these projects from fabric scraps might seem like a bit too much, or perhaps you might feel very restricted with limited materials. Even if you say that you're not creative, I truly believe that you are. You just have to try, you just have to engage that creativity, put all of these materials in front of you and see what your beautiful mind can come up with, because if you won't, you will never know, and when you do, you might be truly amazed at some of the beautiful things that you will be able to create. So I truly believe in you. I want to encourage you. And on a side note, it will take more time creating with fabric scraps than sewing from scratch, so be prepared for that. And also, don't get discouraged if at first you don't necessarily feel that level of certainty in your ideas and your techniques or in the way how all of this is going to play out. It's a muscle that you must work out and a muscle that you must build. So once you do your first project, second, third, and 10th, 11th, you will feel how it all starts to come together. And once you start, it's quite addicting. It's like putting a puzzle together. Speaking of putting it together, once the loops are done on both sides, we can then sandwich the side panel between the front and the back. Now I'm going to do a lightning stitch first from the bottom loop all the way up, leaving enough space for that slit that I was talking about. Next, I'm going to tidy up those seam allowances and do another pass, this time on a serger. And I could have gone with a serger right away on the first try, but since I do have so many little loops, so many moving parts, I figured it is better safe than sorry. Once done, I'm going to give this a really good press, and then I need to move on to making a really long tie for these loops. Now the principle here is exactly the same as if you'd be making a bias tape, just not cut on the bias. And here is what I call the moment of truth. I'm gonna thread this tie through the loops and see how it looks. And I gotta say, I'm starting to seriously fall in love with this project. Alright, now that the bottom part of the shirt is done, let's move on to the top, which means we have to figure out the sleeves. As you can see, I don't have enough of the fabric to cut the full length sleeve, so I'm just going to fold up the hem and cut it like that. And here I was kind of debating a little bit in my head, and I was, having this discussion with myself if I should do something really special about the sleeve, modify the pattern, add something. But the more I look at the side panel, I truly think that that's plenty to add some really interesting detail to the garment. So when it comes to the sleeve, I'm just going to keep it simple and leave it as is. Now to start working on it, I'm going to sew the sleeve seam using French seam technique, and once that is done, I will sew the sleeve into the armhole. I must say that since I'm doing it backwards, it is a tiny bit awkward and unusual, sort of going against the grain, but totally doable. After the sleeve is in, I'm going to press the seams from the inside and then top stitch for a little bit of extra stability. Now I also added a strip of interfacing to the sleeve part of the neckline, and I know it looks rather awkward right now, but most of it will be covered by the neckline. Speaking of which, I did finish it with my favorite fold under method for knits, and I will leave a link to this technique in the description of this video. It is truly very useful and very versatile. After that, I just have to do a little bit of hand stitching, give it a good pass with a lint roller and a good press. With all of that done, let's take a look at the final result. I love the side panel, I love the little slits, and I also like the fact that there isn't too much. It's pretty simple, it's just a raglan sleeve top, but it has just a little bit of that creative magic. Now the viscose scraps were left over from when I made pants, and I definitely can say I'm not really much into wearing coordinating sets, but since I do have pants in the same fabric, I thought, let me just try it together and see how it looks. And here I do have to tuck it in, otherwise it just kind of looks a little awkward, but I do actually love how the full outfit comes to life together. Perhaps I'm even going to wear it like that. And if you want to make the same pants, it's exactly the same pattern that we made together in our So Easy series of sewing these green palazzo pants. So you can make the top, you can make the pants, you can make the whole thing. And I also had a little bit of that viscose left over, so my daughter's Barbie also got a new outfit. A big shout out to all members. I want to thank you so much for all of your support. Check out the Members Extra deep dive for this particular project, as well as a new feature in your members perks, which is Projects at a Glance. I forgot to mention that this side panel is fully functional, so if you would like to, you can definitely tighten this up and cinch it in. Next up, I have 5 sewing machine secrets that I think you'll be really excited to know. So click right over here, and I truly hope that I enticed you, at least a little bit encouraged you to give your fabric scraps a chance and perhaps create something beautiful. I'll see you very soon in another video. Bye!